On April 6, 2025, the world watched with bated breath. President Trump imposed a 150% tariff on goods from China, Mexico, and Canada. A 10% tariff hit imports from other countries, including key allies. Stock markets around the world went into freefall. The Dow Jones plunged by over 1,000 points. The world held its breath. What would happen next? The aftershocks of President Trump's tariff announcement reverberated across the globe. Stock markets from Tokyo to London went into a tailspin. The Nikkei, Japan's benchmark index, plummeted. The FTSE 100, a barometer of British economic health, followed suit. This was a truly global panic. Major US companies, once symbols of American economic might, found themselves caught in the crossfire. Apple, the tech behemoth that had become synonymous with globalization, saw its stock price tumble. This was despite the fact that many of its products were assembled in China. The message was clear: in an interconnected world, there were no winners in a trade war. Tesla, the electric car manufacturer led by the enigmatic Elon Musk, also suffered heavy losses. This was particularly ironic given that Musk had been a vocal advocate for closer ties with China. The tariffs, it seemed, were no respecters of persons or industries. The economic turmoil was not confined to the stock market. The tariffs threatened to upend global supply chains that had been decades in the making. Companies that had relied on the free flow of goods and services across borders were suddenly forced to rethink their entire business models. The uncertainty was crippling. The response from the international community was swift and it was furious. China, the primary target of President Trump's protectionist policies, wasted no time in retaliating. Beijing announced tit-for-tat tariffs on a range of American goods. These included agricultural products like soybeans, a move clearly aimed at hurting Trump's support base in the American heartland. But China's response went far beyond mere tariffs. Seizing the opportunity to challenge America's long-held economic dominance, Beijing began actively promoting the use of its own currency, the yuan, in international trade. This was a direct assault on the US dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. China was not alone in its efforts to chip away at the dollar's hegemony. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, saw an opportunity to reshape the global financial order. They announced plans to fast-track the development of BRICS Pay, a new payment system designed to circumvent the US dollar. The message was clear. The era of American economic dominance was coming to an end. The world was witnessing a seismic shift in the balance of power. The question was no longer whether the global order would change, but how quickly and in what direction. While the global order was being reshaped, the streets of America were erupting in protest. From the bustling metropolis of New York City to the sun-drenched streets of Los Angeles, Americans were making their voices heard. Labor unions, long the backbone of the Democratic Party, organized massive rallies. They denounced the tariffs as a job-killing disaster. Small business owners, the supposed beneficiaries of President Trump's America First policies, were among the most vocal critics of the tariffs. They knew that higher prices for imported goods would hurt their bottom line and could potentially put them out of business. Their anger was palpable. Ordinary citizens, already struggling with rising costs of living, joined the protests. They understood that the tariffs would lead to higher prices for everything from clothing and electronics to food and fuel. The tariffs were not just an abstract economic policy, they were a direct assault on their wallets. The protests were not confined to the coasts. In the heartland of America, farmers who had once been among President Trump's most ardent supporters were now feeling the pain of his policies. China's retaliatory tariffs on American agricultural products had caused the price of soybeans and other crops to plummet. Farmers were facing economic ruin. Section 5. A House Divided. The political fallout from President Trump's tariff war was just as dramatic as the economic consequences. In Washington, D.C., Congress was bitterly divided. Democrats, almost universally opposed to the tariffs, seized on the economic turmoil as evidence of the president's recklessness. They accused him of jeopardizing the economic security of the nation for short-sighted political gain. However, the Republican Party, which had long prided itself on its commitment to free trade, was now deeply split. Some Republicans, particularly those representing districts heavily reliant on manufacturing, grudgingly supported the president's tariffs. They argued that they were necessary to protect American jobs and industries from unfair foreign competition. Other Republicans, however, were deeply uneasy about the tariffs. They worried that the president's protectionist policies would harm the American economy in the long run. They pointed to the growing chorus of criticism from business leaders and economists, who warned that the tariffs would lead to higher prices, job losses, and slower economic growth. The division within the Republican Party was a reflection of the deep divisions within American society itself. The tariff war had exposed the fault lines in the American body politic, pitting workers against consumers, rural communities against urban centers, and those who benefited from globalization against those who felt left behind. Section 6. The Spectre of Inflation. As weeks turned into months, the economic consequences of President Trump's tariff war began to be felt more acutely. One of the most immediate and concerning effects was a sharp rise in inflation. The tariffs, by increasing the cost of imported goods, had ignited a firestorm of price increases across the board. Consumers, already struggling with stagnant wages and rising costs of living, were hit hard. The price of everyday essentials such as food, clothing, and gasoline skyrocketed. Families were forced to make difficult choices, cutting back on spending, dipping into savings, or going into debt just to make ends meet. Businesses, both large and small, were also feeling the pinch. Higher input costs, driven by the tariffs, squeezed profit margins. Some businesses were forced to raise prices, further fueling inflation. Others had to lay off workers or even shut their doors for good. The Federal Reserve, America's central bank, found itself caught between a rock and a hard place. Its mandate was to keep inflation in check and promote economic growth. But the tariffs presented a unique challenge. Raising interest rates to combat inflation could stifle economic growth, while keeping rates low could cause inflation to spiral out of control. Section 7. A New World Order. As the economic and political turmoil unleashed by President Trump's tariff war continued to unfold, one thing became abundantly clear. The world order as we knew it was changing. The United States, long the dominant economic and military power, was increasingly seen as an unreliable partner. Its commitment to free trade, once unwavering, was now in doubt. China, emboldened by America's retreat from the global stage, was wasting no time in asserting itself. Beijing was forging new trade deals, strengthening its military and promoting its own vision of a multipolar world, one in which the United States was no longer the sole superpower. The BRICS nations, once dismissed as an unwieldy grouping of disparate economies, were emerging as a potent force in the New World Order. Their combined economic might, coupled with their growing political clout, posed a serious challenge to the established order. The European Union, despite its internal divisions, was also seeking to chart its own course in a world increasingly defined by great power competition. The EU was strengthening its economic ties with other countries, investing in its own defense capabilities, and promoting multilateralism as a counterweight to rising nationalism. In Section 8, the perils of protectionism. The tariff war initiated by President Trump highlighted the perils of protectionism. Instead of protecting jobs, tariffs raised prices and hurt businesses. They damaged America's reputation, pushing countries towards China. The US once championed globalization for growth and prosperity, but many now feel globalization benefits others at their expense. The tariff war reflected deep-seated anger and frustration. The challenge is addressing these concerns without protectionism. Section 9. Towards a more uncertain future. As the dust settled on President Trump's tariff war, the world was left to grapple with the consequences. The global economy, already fragile, had been dealt a severe blow. The rules-based trading system, painstakingly built over decades, had been shaken to its core, and the United States, once the guarantor of global stability, was now seen by many as a source of instability. The future remained uncertain. Would the world retreat into protectionism and nationalism, as it had done in the 1930s with disastrous consequences? Or would cooler heads prevail, leading to a renewed commitment to cooperation and multilateralism? The answer to this question would depend in large part on the choices made by leaders in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, and other capitals around the world. The stakes could not be higher. The future of the global economy, and indeed the world itself, hung in the balance.